Brothers and sisters, why do we suffer? I like to reflect on this question with you, focusing on the second reading from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. Towards the end of this missive, Paul has been talking about the extraordinary revelations that he had received, but he doesn't want to draw attention to these mystical experiences. He's not overly elated by them or being spiritually puffed up because of them. Perhaps he realized that such self-aggrandizement could easily develop into a personality cult. If this would happen, then he would become the center of attention, and then his gospel message would get sidetracked. So this would not happen. He is stricken by a thorn in the flesh, given to him by Satan, no less. So just what this affliction was is not at all clear. Some say it may have been a physical ailment, such as epilepsy or bad eyesight or a speech impediment. Others think it might have been some kind of disorder in one of the churches that were under his guidance. Whatever the thorn was, he was clearly not talking about some passing problem, such as a cold. He's talking about some steady, difficult experience, whether it be physical, psychological, or spiritual. It's a chronic condition that persists and won't go away. But he says that it was given to him so that he may not become too elated. Then we hear this: 3 times I begged the Lord that it might leave me. Paul repeatedly asked, Lord, please take this away from me. Now, Paul was not a wimp when it came to suffering. Earlier, we heard what he endured: stripes, whippings beyond measure, and prisons more frequently, and deaths often. From the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. And the list of sufferings, goes on, shipwrecks and being in prison and so forth. But what was uppermost in Paul's mind was his ministry, not his personal advantage nor disadvantage. Indeed, he endured all the suffering, for his concern was for all the churches. Therefore, we can presume that he was reluctant to accept this thorn in his flesh, not because he didn't want to suffer, but because he saw it as an impediment to his ministry. So what answer did Paul get from the Lord? Listen, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made possible in weakness. My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made possible in weakness. Grace. That is one of Paul's favorite expressions: unmerited love. My unmerited love is sufficient for you. Indeed, as the psalmist reminds us, for your love is better than life. I think what Paul and the psalmist mean is that if you are connected to God, the deepest source of your life and being, then anything in principle can be endured, can be dealt with and overcome. Why? Nothing trumps God's love for you. Again, my grace is sufficient for you. Then Paul adds that little addition that's so typical of the paradoxical nature of Christianity. For power is made perfect in weakness. Power is made perfect in weakness. What does Paul mean by this countercultural assertion? If there's one attribute that's not highly regarded in our control, power-driven society, it is weakness, because it is the weak who get preyed upon. Paul came to know that real power is not found in dominating or controlling others, but is found in vulnerability. Stripped of power, one is more likely to turn to God. It is like a law of spiritual physics. The more vulnerable, powerless one is, the more one is open to God's power. Conversely, the more capable, powerful one may be, the less one is prone to look to God for help. Humbled by his affliction, this thorn in his side, Paul ironically feels more powerful, for he knows that the power of God is working through him. And furthermore, because his affliction is on public display, others will recognize that anything that Paul accomplishes is really the effect of God working through him. Paul drives this home in his letter to the Galatians, that when he dies to his egoic self, when he has been crucified with Christ, then is no longer I, but Christ lives in me. These paradoxes would sound like so much foolishness were they not grounded in the paschal mystery, the death and resurrection of Jesus. It was when Jesus was the weakest on the cross that he was the strongest. Now, when Paul is the weakest, enduring insults, hardships, persecutions, and constraints, he is strong with the power of Christ. It is a very bold boast that Paul makes, but he's making it to believers who've accepted the bold claims of Christian faith. So, brothers and sisters, spend some time with this 12th chapter from 2 Corinthians in this magnificent lyrical passage. The great St. Paul does not boast of his extraordinary revelations, but boasts and rejoices in his weaknesses, because power is made perfect precisely in weakness. Amen.